Very good evening to you. My name is William Roca. I'm the Director of Programs here at Village Preservation. We are so glad for you to be joining us this evening, our 88th and final program of this year, 2025. Now, before I introduce our esteemed guests for this evening, if you are joining a village preservation program for the first time, let me just quickly tell you a little bit about village preservation. We were founded back in 1980 and we work to document, celebrate, and preserve the architectural, cultural, and historic heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We've helped secure landmark designation for more than 1,300 buildings. And as you just heard me say, the 88th, we generally do around 75 to 80 programs throughout the year, the majority of which are absolutely free. We do a whole combination of virtual, in-person walking tours, you name it. We've probably have done a program on it. Now, we are a members-based organization, so we can't do the work that we do without your support. If you would be interested in finding out a little bit more about village preservation, head over to villagepreservation.org. Learn about the advocacy work that we do. I also highly recommend that you check out our digital resources, which are all free to available to use for free. And these include an amazing image archive of more than 5,000 images, many donated by village preservation supporters, pictures taken over many, many decades documenting the history of our neighborhoods. We also have an incredible oral history archive. Hear the voices of some of the people that lived and did amazing things within our neighborhoods. And I also can't highly recommend enough that you please check out our virtual maps as well. You can go ahead, build yourself a walking tour from the comfort of your own home, or go out and pound the pavement and learn about all the incredible people and places in the neighborhoods that we cover. Now, of course, I also would love if you would scan that QR code, learn a little bit more about our membership programs. Our membership benefits include getting first dibs on being able to register for programs, many of which do sell out very, very quickly. And we also have member-only specific programs as well. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about membership, to donate, or just about the free resources, which are free and available to use whether you become a member or not, just head over to villagepreservation.org. And I also ask you to visit villagepreservation.org/events. You can learn about some of our upcoming programs. Our January 2026 program roster is going to be released in the next couple of days. So please be on the lookout for that. And nearly all those programs will be free and available to join in next month. All right, but now it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest for this evening, the third year in a row that we have been joined by Mary Brown. That's how good she is. She first spoke with us here at Village Preservation back in the spring of 2005. She works as an archivist at the Center for Migration Studies, a mission of the Scalabrini Fathers, who are also active in the village at Our Lady of Pompeii Parish. She teaches writing and U.S. history as an adjunct professor at Marymount Manhattan College. She received her doctorate from Columbia University in 1986, and her dissertation was on Italian Catholic immigrants in the Archdiocese of New York. She also authored the Village Preservation Commission report and study, The Italians of the South Village. And that reminds me that December is South Village Month. That was the month that the South Village was designated as a historic district. So please definitely go check out that report. It is available on our website. And before I hand it over to Mary, just a reminder that this is a Zoom webinar, so your cameras are off and you will be muted, but we definitely want you to take part in the conversation. If you have a question for Mary at any point during this presentation, you can go ahead and pop that into the chat or the Q&A feature. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull up your presentation, Mary, and then I will vanish into the shadows. things around.
Okay. I see. I see my first slide that says welcome.
Everyone should see that. So if you can't see it, let us know in the chat.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Am I okay on sound?
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, everyone says yes, yes, yes.
Okay, great. Then welcome welcome to tonight's talk. Just as a reminder, I was here last year. I'm the person who gave the talk on Most Precious Blood last year. The church about the Italian saints and their statues. The church is still there. They still are having Italian saints programs. The book is still available. But next slide, please, for this year. And because this year we're doing something totally different. I'm going to be talking, I work at a place called the Center for Migration Studies in New York, and we have 129 now processed collections that deal with immigration in various forms. And tonight I'm going to be looking into one of those collections. This is a collection that we've been working with very recently. The collection comes from an organization that was founded in 1937 as the Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany. And the collection and the organization phased out in 1966. At that time, it was known as the Catholic Committee for Refugees, with no place attended to. Next slide, please. So one of our jobs is to see how it went from Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany to Catholic Committee for Refugees. We're going to look at how it moved from one address at 123 East 2nd Street to another address at 265 West 14th Street, very far apart, all the way on the East Village to all the way on the West Village. We're going to look at something that started before World War II to look at something that was active after World War II. We're going to be looking at something that was a very small organization and to look at something that became a very big one. And we're going to look at how that developed and why it developed that way. And I imagine that some of you have had some personal experience with one or another piece of this story. So we hope we have time for some of these comments. So next slide, let's get going. Our story starts, I'm sorry, there'll be lots of fuzzy documents rather than lots of pretty pictures, but our story starts, if you can read Latin, in Germany on the 31st of August, 1936, when Adolf Cardinal Bertram of Breslau, whose other job, besides being the Archbishop of Breslau, his other job was to be chair of something called the Fulda Conference. Fulda Conference was the conference of the Catholic bishops and archbishops of Germany. And they had just met, and they had just arrived at a series of decisions, and he was communicating those decisions to his peers, to his colleagues in the United States. And what he is explaining to them in Latin are recent developments in Germany. Some of you may be able to read along, not necessarily because you know any Latin, but if you look on the second sheet, the one that's on the right, and you go to the first full paragraph, the first one where you can see an indent, and you go down to the 1, 2, 3, 4th line, you'll see something that really didn't have a Latin word, nix aria, not Aryan. Yeah, what he's trying to describe are the Nuremberg laws that had been promulgated in September of 1935, about the time that the bishops held their annual conference. So they were unable to sort of process those laws that year. But by the next year, they had felt their impact. Most people think of the Nuremberg laws as having a great impact on the Jewish population, and of course they did, but they had an impact on everyone whom the Nazis called non-Aryan. That is, not Aryan, not part of their master race. And that included people who had been Jewish but had converted to other faiths, in this case, Catholicism. Not only people who had converted themselves, but people whose ancestors were Jewish, who had a Jewish grandparent who had converted, and now a couple of generations later, people who thought they were Catholic come to find out that the Nazis consider them non-Aryan and are denying them citizenship, have taken their citizenship away from them. And if they work in education, if they work in the legal profession, if they are members of the military, they can no longer hold their jobs. Their marriages to an Aryan, they cannot be married to an Aryan. Usually it's phrased as you can't have sex with an Aryan, but of course, if you're married to one, you can't be married to one because that's what you do when you're married. Their relations with their children become somewhat fraught because their children are Mischlings. Their children are not completely Aryan or non-Aryan, and so forth. This is all becoming very difficult for many of these people. They are trying to leave Germany. And from the bishop's point of view, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. That might be your best option. And we can help you. We have been helping people immigrate for years for peaceable reasons, just because they want to go and find another place where they might, make a better living. People have been migrating for years. Now they might have to migrate, and maybe we can help them. But given this emergency, we don't want them to just migrate and take their chances. We want them to migrate and have somebody on the other side help them resettle. So this purpose of this letter is to ask the American bishops, if we can get them out of here, can you receive them there? And so that's the purpose of this letter. Next slide, please. This letter is going to be reinforced by some people at the top level. You can see that this is letterhead from the Secretary of State of the Vatican. If you look on the upper left corner there, you can see the papal tiara letterhead. And if you look where the red arrow is, you can just barely make it out because he had a very modest signature, but that's Eugenio Cardinal Pacelli. Some of you know that Eugenio Cardinal Pacelli will become Pope Pius XII later. But right now, in 1938, on the top right on the first page, it says Dal Vaticano on the 7th of June, 1938. So this is a little out of sequence, but it was the clearest letter I had. So that's the one I scanned for you. And again, it's in Latin, but it's Pacelli in his position as Secretary of State, which was the job he had before he became Pope. And he's at the request of the Pope, at the request of Pius XI, who's he's working for Pius XI, and he's at the Pope's request, he's writing this letter to the American bishops, and he's trying to light a fire under them. In Latin, he's trying to explain to them that the Pope is also very interested in what's happening in Germany and very concerned about what's happening in Germany and now in Austria too, because the Anschluss is underway. You can see that in that second paragraph, the aggregation of Germany and Austria. It's in the third line there, et aggregatius Germania, Austria, and then there's a comma there and some more words. He's very concerned about what's happening. He's concerned about what's happening to the people. He wants, you can see in the next line, he's referring to the charity of Christ that we ought to be succoring, taking care of these people, and he's trying to get the bishops to understand that he too would like something done. The bishops are very hesitant for a couple of reasons. They have already got an agenda in normal times, they would be busy building a kind of cradle to grave set of services for their people, hospitals for them to be born in, schools for them to be educated in, orphanages and other specialized kinds of hospitals for when they had special needs. And the Depression had thrown a wrench into these plans because it cut down on their numbers of donors while it increased the numbers of people who needed help. So the bishops were sort of scrambling to get their own work done. And now someone wants to send them some more people to take care of. So this is a problem. The bishops also were, a little cloudy on. They knew there were problems in Germany. They did know. Everybody knew there was some kind of problem. Everybody who read the newspapers knew something was going on. The details were not all that clear. The number of non-Aryan Catholics was not known. No one had any kind of census of that sort of thing. They also didn't know how many of them could move because the amount of money available to move anybody was not clear. How many of them would want to move, how many of them could move, how many of them would want to come to the United States versus some other country. Many of them, unfortunately, a lot of people went from Germany to Austria, and then the Anschluss came there and they went to like the next German speaking country, which was Czechoslovakia, which wasn't a good move either. And so, figuring out where these refugees would go and then where they could go, where they had the financial means to go and so forth. These were problems that, needed to be addressed. And the bishops weren't clear on, what was going to happen. Still, there were some people who were quite concerned enough to volunteer to do something. And if we look at the next slide, we'll get started on our little nucleus of people. And one of them is Archbishop Francis Joseph Rummel. This is a bishops' committee. Bishops tended to work with bishops, so I needed to show you his picture there. And this is a letter that comes to him from Germany. You can sort of see German type at the top, and you can see that it's in English now. Someone is attempting to write to him in English. The person who's writing to him, you can see the signature at the bottom. The signature says Reverend Max J. Grosser. So it's Father Max Grosser, and underneath is a title, Secretary General. Father Grosser ran the St. Raphael Society for the Protection of German Immigrants. He ran an agency in Germany that helped immigrants leave Germany, gave them advice, showed them how to buy a ticket, how to get their paperwork in order to leave Germany. The men had to prove that they'd done any military service they needed to do, that sort of thing. So he showed them a map where they might want to go if they went to the United States. They wanted to buy a farm. Here's where you buy it, that sort of thing. So he took care of things like that. He was in charge of that agency, and he's going to coordinate things between the German outgoing people and the American arrivals. Okay, so that's who he is. But the person we're really interested in is the next slide. And this person here. His name is Joseph Ostermann. Father, you can see the clerical collar, Joseph Ostermann. He was born in the United States, but of German parentage. So he grew up speaking German, reading German, writing German. He was bilingual, and that's how he got this job. When he was born in New Jersey, but when he decided he wanted to become a priest, when he felt the call to the priesthood, he also felt the call to become a priest in the Archdiocese of New York. And both he and his brother became priests in the Archdiocese of New York. He taught German at the seminary up in Dunwoody here in New York before he was assigned to the job of figuring out what to do to answer the German bishop's request that if the German bishops can get people over here, can the American bishops take care of them? Archbishop Rummel is going to be kind of the face of this. He's going to answer the mail from the bishops. He's going to be the the person who handles the correspondence with the bishops and with the Pope and things like that. And he's going to be sort of the primary fundraiser. But Father Osterman's going to be the person in New York who will come to the dock, receive people if they can get here. He's going to be the person who takes care of their actual, does the hands-on work. So that's how this job is divided up. Okay, next slide. There we go. Where does he work out of? Okay, he's going to work out of a couple of places. The first one is at the very sort of northern end of where the village preservation might be concerned with, in Chelsea, at a place called the Leo House on 23rd, West 23rd Street. Leo House was actually born on State Street at the very, very tip of Manhattan in 1889. And it was born as a kind of a center, a hospice for when German immigrants arrived in the harbor in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, because arriving in the harbor wasn't enough. You still had to get off the boat, go through Ellis Island, and then figure out where you were going to go from there. And so the St. Raphael Society had people to help you with that. If you got detained on Ellis Island, they had German-speaking people to help you deal with the paperwork there. They had bedrooms where you could stay overnight while you were catching your next transportation. They had a cafeteria. They had a chapel. They were basically performing services for people who needed a little like a little bridge between getting off the boat and getting on to their next place. They're still here. Yes, to answer that question, they're still here. In 1927, in the 1920s, the United States began to cut down. Congress began to shut off immigration from Europe. They reduced the number of visas they allowed. And so Leo House transitioned its mission somewhat. And they moved out of State Street. They moved to 23rd Street. They built this sort of hotel-like building. And although they still served primarily Germans, from what I understand, I've been there. I've seen a few of their records. They still have all of their records going back to the 1889. They still have them. So I've seen the books, but I haven't really had a chance to look at them fully. But they became more of a sort of a broader hotel that served traveling clergy and traveling sisters as well. And you can book a room there. You can still stay there if you want to. They still have people staying there. They'll be happy to have you. This is what it looks like on the outside. You can see Leo House on the left there, if you can just sort of make it out. The people obscuring the view are Mexican seminarians in the 1920s. Mexico was also having a clerical persecution problem in the 1920s, and they began shutting down Catholic institutions. So these people couldn't attend their seminary in Mexico, so they were going to Spain to get the rest of their clerical education. So that's why they're there. And that's where Father Osterman started his work. So if we look at the next slide, we'll see he's writing out his first report from Leo House. There's their address on West 23rd Street. And there's his first name for his organization, Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany. And I want to spend a minute on that name, Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany. The from Germany part is to kind of make it clear that we're dealing with people who need help because they've been thrown out of Germany. We're not dealing with everybody who needs help in the ongoing Great Depression. We're not dealing with anything except this German problem, okay? And we are dealing with Catholic refugees because in the 1930s, the kind of gold standard of social work was everyone takes care of their own people. Catholics take care of Catholics, Jewish people take care of Jewish people, Protestants, Lutherans take care of Lutherans, Protestant, and so forth around the circle. And the reason for that was that people tended to think that help, social worker help, was kind of a cloak for proselytism. That if Catholics were helping Jewish people, they were going to help them right out of their faith and into another faith. And Catholics were afraid that Protestants had the same agenda. So everybody, kind of stuck to their own people for help, because they were always a little afraid of that the help might be a cloak for proselytism. And so it was considered kind of good manners, actually, that if Jewish people applied for help, to bring them over to the Jewish agency and say, here are the people who are going to help you, because you needn't be afraid of them. So that's how that worked back then. And you'll see that beginning to break down here as we go along. Okay, next slide, please. They moved out of Leo House within months, though. And they moved out of Leo House. They were advised to. That Father Max Grosser, whose signature I showed you a little bit earlier, he recommended against staying at Leo House. He didn't say why. I've been to Leo House. It isn't really suitable for an office that's receiving people and interviewing them and saying, what do you need? And here's how to help you. There's no office space within it. It's a hotel. It's got a lobby. It doesn't really have office space like that. So there's one thing. The other thing is kind of cloak and daggery, that there were the German government definitely knew what these people were doing, and they were keeping tabs on it. Father Grosser came over here to help set up the American side of this. And when he went back to Germany, the Gestapo arrested him. He spent months in Alexanderplatz, which was their prison in Berlin. And he got out only because the German bishops, and they all grouped together, the whole group of them, the whole hierarchy, banded together and made a fuss until the German government saw the light and let him out. And he was still dead within 18 months. And he was not an old man. This was deadly serious business here. And it wouldn't be too much. I don't think you're paranoid to think that Leo House is in a business district. It wouldn't be too much to say that somebody could be, easily sitting across the street all day, unnoticed by anybody, but watching what's going on, who's coming and going from Leo House. Here at St. Nicholas Church, at 123 East 2nd Street, way over in the East Village, which had been a heavily German neighborhood and is now mostly a Jewish neighborhood. There's about 100 families still attending this German church. But it's a residential neighborhood. It's one of those Jane Jacobs eyes on the street situation. Everyone who's there is there all the time. It's the same people. They would notice some weirdo standing on the street corner all day, watching the comings and goings at St. Nicholas. Plus, the church had a basement that could be used for office space. The church isn't there anymore. That's why I've got this picture from the 19th century. If you'd send me the next slide, please. That's what's there today. The church is where the parking lot is now, and this is Village Towers on East 2nd Street. So if you go looking for it, this is what you'll see today. So if we can get the next slide, please, you'll also see 134 East 2nd Street, which is the rectory of the old St. Nicholas Church. And you can sort of see that it's designed to go with the church, with those little Gothic arch windows going all the way up, and the little Gothic arch doors and so forth. It's got some touches of that sort of thing. It's designed to kind of go with a church that used to be there but isn't there anymore, and now it kind of sticks out on the street. You'll notice it right away if you go over there. It's the only thing like it on the street. But they didn't use this building. Rectories didn't have a lot of office space in the 1930s. They really were kind of houses for priests to live in back then. So they used 123 as the office space. So now that we've got them in a place, what did they actually do for refugees? Let's take a look at that. So if we can look at the next slide. And here's some typing here, financial statement from their very first months in 1937. And you can see that the first thing they did was run up a debt. They took in $300, that's the number at the bottom, and spent $620.49. The second thing you might notice right away is that Father Osterman is not used to doing this sort of thing. He's got commas where people would normally use periods to separate the dollars and the cents. Believe me, we're going to keep track of these little signs that he's not really used to finance. You can see up here financial assistance given $111.45. So right away, we're assisting somebody, we're giving somebody or some bodies some money, but he doesn't list how many people or who they are or what kind of financial assistance. Believe me, inquiring minds are going to want to know that sort of thing. On the other hand, he's got like every single office supply listed. So, again, you can sort of see that this is someone who's not entirely used to the job yet. He makes some great strides, though. Let's take a look at his next report, which is like 1 month later. And you can see that not 1 month later, it's September, I'm sorry, so it's about 6 months later. But in those 6 months, he's made some great improvements here. He's learned to use periods, for one thing. And he's got a great more description of the people that he's taking care of. On the left-hand side, you can see that he's got his cases all sorted out. And one of the first things you learn is that they're not here. The ones in the United States, there's only 35 people, only 35 cases. That's not 35 people, it's 35 cases. There might be some families or couples there. But most of the cases are abroad, so that most of his work, you need to slide down a little bit and look to where it says affidavits. It's the 1, 2, 3, fourth one down. What he's spending most of the time doing is getting affidavits. That is, getting someone to agree to promise that they're going to sponsor this person. They're going to make sure this person doesn't become a public charge in the United States, that they won't go on welfare. Okay, and that's very important. The United States doesn't take on an additional welfare person during the Great Depression. We still have that law. They're still terribly concerned about that sort of thing. So, and you can see again, a great deal of detail about the expenditures of the office and so forth. So they're terribly concerned about that. Or he's used to doing that kind of reporting. So you can see how this kind of thing happens. So we are doing some care of people here. We're doing some care of people, but we are also doing some fundraising. And I want to do a little bit of that in a minute. I'll show you that. If we take a look at our next slide, we'll take a look at the fundraising here. The fundraising is divided into two types. I'm just going to say a quick word about Archbishop Rummel, because Archbishop Rummel was the major fundraiser. He taps his fellow bishops, and this is his report, his efforts with his fellow bishops. And as you can see, he is getting a little something from those fellow bishops. He's kicking in himself. He was the top one there, the first line there is him putting in some money, not as much money as some other people. Other dioceses are giving more, although other dioceses may have been wealthier than New Orleans, a southern diocese, although one with quite a few Catholics and not necessarily a very impoverished place. It was a big port city. I can tell you that this is divided between dioceses that took up a special collection for this. That would be the ones that have sort of the weird little numbers, like San Antonio, $198.13. That represents a collection that was just handed over to the bishop. But the round numbers, like the $5,000 from New York, probably represent Cardinal Hayes finding something in his budget and handing it to Archbishop Rummel, but not necessarily taking up a collection in the diocese. So there you go. Next slide, please. This is though something that Father Osterman did. He pulled wires here. He knew people. He was a musician himself. He was interested in music himself. He did some composition, and he knew some people. This was one of the people he knew, Minska Elman, who was a concert violinist. He was a child prodigy in St. Petersburg in 1904. He was an escapee from the Bolshevik Revolution, came to New York, and lived here here until his death in 1967. And during the 1930s, remembering that he himself had been a refugee from the Russian Revolution, he played benefit concerts for refugees from the Nazis, and he divided his earnings from those benefit concerts among the Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish organizations. And this is a picture that he gave Father Osterman as a little remembrance. So Father Osterman tapped musical stars to play for him, but he also, next picture, please, also put on his own concerts. This is a program that was put together for St. Nicholas. It's just the first page, just the cover. The Latin there is "We greet our hope, the Blessed Mother who's descending from the clouds," to the waiting hands of these, looks like they're very hungry or hardworking people with their very knuckly hands there. But if you look at the next picture, you'll see the advertising from inside that program. The program itself is a quartet doing classical music, and then some other a little orchestra doing some classical music. So I didn't copy the program. It's a classical, some German classical music played at St. Nicholas at the church for people to enjoy. And hopefully, I guess they passed the hat during the thing as well, and to collect some money. But the real money was collected by having people sponsor that program. And as you can see, it was sponsored by the Protestant and Jewish agencies contributed. You can see the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee and the American Committee for Christian, that would be Protestant German refugees, but also a lot of local businesses, Luchow's restaurant, and then even smaller businesses and some professionals in the neighborhood. Just like a parish bulletin. So please, next slide. And you can see things getting more sophisticated in terms of the help being given. This is by 1938. We have gotten our affidavits under control. They are being supplied to people. They're as well as being worked on. Work is being supplied to people. People are finding jobs. Scholarships are being found for students. People are being found room and board. Some people are being given medical attention if they need it. The only thing that's a little weird is they've got a count of every letter being sent out by their typist, which probably duplicates, the letters are about work being located and scholarships being located and that sort of thing. So it's a little unclear, exactly how the letters connect to the work being found and stuff. But there you go. Anyway, next slide, please. The slide with the stats on it, they don't really give you an idea of who the people are. If you want to know who the people are, the place you have to go to is the list of people who needed legal aid. Because if they needed legal aid, Father Osterman referred them to an expert, a man named Thomas Mulholland, who worked for another Catholic agency in the area. And when he filed his annual reports to his boss, he did it in this fashion. He listed everyone's name. I happened to pick up the names from 138 to 155 for you. He went all the way to 208 this year, which is 1937-38. And then he would, on this side, on the right-hand side, explain to his boss what he did for that person. When he says application for extension, it means that this person had a visitor's visa, and now he's got a visitor's visa for a longer time in the country. He does not have to go back to Germany. Some people got their visa adjusted, we would say. Those are the ones where it goes to permanent admission. So they used to have a visitor's visa. Now they have a permanent stay type visa. Sometimes you'll see it says admission secured through Cuba or consul in Canada. What that meant was the person left this country, went to the other country, and got a whole new visa. That they used to have a visitor's visa, but now that visa has been canceled, and now they have a permanent residence visa. So it's a different kind of adjustment. It's actually what happened to the Von Trapp family when they came to this country. I'm sorry if you've watched The Sound of Music and thought they climbed every mountain. That's not really quite how it happened. They had their visas adjusted. So we nobody here got turned down in this particular group of people. Everybody's been helped. Everybody's either just waiting to see what happens to their affidavit, waiting to see what happens, or they've been helped. But everybody looks like they're going to be good. So that's happy news because nobody wants to go back to Germany. Okay, next slide, please. The other way to get a name is you have to be really well known, and this person was. Some people may know the name John Oestreicher. You may know him as Father John Oestreicher. Father Oestreicher was born in Austria. He was born into a Jewish family. He converted to Catholicism and then became a priest. He was already an active opponent of Nazism before the Nazis arrived in Austria. He was lucky to make his escape. His parents were not so lucky. They were captured and died, killed in concentration camps. He was twice lucky because when the Nazis invaded France, where he had gone from Austria, he was also able to escape from there and able to come to the United States, where, as you can see, he is ensconced at the Leo House. And he is paying it forward. He's writing to one of the people involved in refugee care here, letting him know that there's some people in France who might need to leave, and checking on that case. He's busy in New York at this point in 1941. He was busy saying mass for people who spoke German and would need the sermon to be in German. The mass was in Latin, but the sermon would be in German, and hearing confessions to people who needed to confess in German. He would go on to a professorship at Seton Hall, and he would go on to be an advisor at the Second Vatican Council. He was one of the people who contributed to the Vatican's declaration on non-Christian religions, Nostra Aetate. So next slide, please. In 1940, a couple of problems began to crop up with the Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany. The first problem was, as you may have guessed from those commas in Father Ostermann's financial reports, no one could ever read his financial reports. No one could ever figure out what he was trying to tell them. And there were other sorts of problems with his finances. He was not a trained financial person, and very few of the clergy were. And Cardinal Hayes wasn't either. He was born and brought up in this archdiocese, and he tolerated that situation. But he died in 1938. And in the spring of 1939, by then, Pacelli had become Pope Pius XII, and he appoints Francis Joseph Spellman to be Archbishop Spellman. He'll later become Cardinal Spellman after World War II. But he had been raised in Boston, and he had been trained differently. He had been trained with a little more financial know-how. And he comes here and is just not going to put up with these financial reports. He cannot put up with something he can't understand. And this is especially important because by 1939, the Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany is unofficially taken care of Austrians as well, because the Anschluss has happened, and it's taking care of Catholics from Czechoslovakia because the Munich Pact has happened, and it might take care of Catholics from Poland because Hitler's saber rattling over there. And this Spellman can see that this is becoming a multi-country, multi-language, multi-everything problem. And Ostermann is still taking care of Germans in a German neighborhood with his German friends and supporters as if this was a kind of parish problem. Spellman transfers Ostermann to another parish in upstate New York. He lives out the rest of his life in upstate New York, serving various parishes. He died in 1974 with the title of Monsignor. Spellman gets in a new person. Next slide, we'll see that new person. The priest in the picture is Emil Camorra. He was Father Camorra when he got the job, and he soon becomes Monsignor Camorra. He spoke German. He was actually also a pastor. He was pastor of St. Joseph of the Holy Family, which is on 125th Street. It's at the base of Morningside Park. Some of you may know Morningside Park is on a kind of slope between Morningside Heights and Harlem. And he's in that parish there. And he spoke German, but he was also a trained social worker and he knew accounting. So he was what Spellman really needed. This picture was taken much later, but it's the picture I have of him. Anyway, he comes in and he's going to be very different, and we'll see how different it is when we look at this next picture. So next slide, please. First of all, the name changes. It becomes the Catholic Committee for Refugees. No Germany here. So we're moving on to a much broader field, no specific country, and also no Catholic refugees. Although they do continue to focus on Catholics, they still maintain the field, the idea that Jews take care of Jews, Protestants take care of Protestants, Catholics take care of Catholics. The Travelers Aid Society takes care of people who don't have an affiliation. It's much later that it becomes like everyone takes care of everyone. But they move the Catholic to the beginning to emphasize that this is Catholics exercising charity. We are the Catholic Committee for Refugees. We are Catholics acting as charitable people. So we are Catholics acting, not Catholics, not a committee for Catholics who need help. We are Catholics acting to give help. So that's that. And then here's another change. Let's look at another slide. He moves the office to a real office. He moves it to this big office building on 14th Street over by 8th Avenue, 265 West 14th Street. The office was built in 1930. It was one of those things that they built, had the contract to build, and then the Depression happened, so they finished building it, and then it built it into the Depression. And I looked at the office, the certificate of occupancy, and that also is dated 1930. So it was finished that same year, and it was started to be occupied that same year. Camorra moves into it in 1940, in February of 1940. I'm not really sure exactly where he's within this building, but it's an office space. Okay, so it is much more officey. In fact, people don't come by to the degree that they did at St. Nicholas, where people were coming by and being interviewed and being helped, in a kind of an old-fashioned way. Camorra is sitting in an office here and moving money about and dealing with people that are somewhat distant. He won't actually see them, especially at first, because in 1940, World War II has started in Europe. The borders have come down, and he doesn't actually have refugees to care for because nobody can move. I think the next slide will show you what he's doing. Yes, he's basically concerned with something called mail service. That is, people who were writing to their relatives in Europe. Their relatives, they can't write to them anymore. Their relatives are behind enemy lines. The mail has been cut off. They can't find their relatives. They can't talk. They can't hear from their relatives. Where are their relatives? Are their relatives okay? What's happened? And so the Vatican uses its connections to see, because the Vatican's not at war with anybody. The Vatican uses its connections to see what they can find out. And Camorra uses his connections to the Vatican to see if he can answer these questions. And here you can see that breakdown. This is a Jewish agency, but they can't get into any place. They can't find out what's going on. So they turn to Camorra and they say, can you help us? I'm taking the liberty of, again, so they've asked before, calling on you for assistance in locating some people. And they list the people. And I wrote up big the part I wanted to pay attention to. My latest information is that they were last known to have been in a place called Theresienstadt, which they can't spell correctly, and is part of what was formerly Czechoslovakia. And it's amazing to hold something like this in your hands and to realize that you know what's happening, and these people don't know what's happening. That these people, that history was very different for these people. The time is very different. The whole thing is very different. Their experience is very different. I tried to find out what happened. There's a place called Bad Arolsen where you can log on and find out names, but unfortunately the names of these people, Clara Schauer, Anna Schauer, and Adele Fleisch, the names belong to more than one person, And even though I also have the name of the camp to which they were sent, Theresienstadt, um, unfortunately, people with that name, more than one person with that name was sent to the camp. So I can't entirely figure out if we've got the right person. And so I can't entirely figure out if they survived their experience or not. Um, so I'm sorry about that. I can't really give you an end to the story, but I can tell you, like I said, it's simply astonishing to hold something like that and to realize the difference between, that this is a very different thing for them and for me. Okay, let's take a look at our next slide. Um, one of the things that happens that's very different from Father Ostermann's experience and Father Monsignor Camora's experience is that when Father Ostermann was working, it was the you wouldn't really use the word refugee often to talk about what was happening, at least not, you know, so publicly, because the last thing you want, we weren't at war with Germany until 1941. So you don't really accuse the German government of creating refugees at this point. It's not something, it's got diplomatic connotations, it's got diplomatic implications, and it's not something that the Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany is going to do lightly. Okay. After the war, no problem. These are refugees. The German government has lost total control. There's not even a German government. They're an occupied country. And the Americans are playing a big role in that occupation. And in theory, the British are playing a role in it, the French are playing a role in it, the Soviets are playing a role in it. But in actuality, the British don't have that kind of money, the French don't have that kind of money, and the Soviets, their attitude towards refugees is, if you aren't going to send them all back to us and let us do whatever we want with them, and they would, they would like vet them, they would like check to see if these they accuse some of them of being traitors, because they gave up and let themselves get captured or stuff like that. And they would send them to their own work camps. So after you get liberated from the Nazis, you got to go work for the Soviets. And the Americans didn't want that. They were like, well, no, you should let them have their own lives back. And so the Soviets were bowed out of refugee care entirely. They didn't participate in the refugee program at all. And so the Americans were like, okay, we're going to feed them. We're going to do something. We're going to figure out what to do with them. And so here's all these people. We have these pictures come from our collection. And the reason we've got all these pictures is because they sort of represent different things that are different stages of the care of these people. Passport pictures, and people that are nicely in their homes and sent in pictures, and people who are being in the process of being taken care of. People are going from place to place, waiting for their airplane or being met at a dock or something like that. So, and the government partnered with a lot of private charities, with Hebrew and Grenade Society, and with the Lutherans' various incarnations, but with this Catholic Committee for Refugees. What the Catholic Committee for Refugees had three groups they were particularly concerned with. So next slide, and we'll take a look at those three groups. The first one was scholars. They sent a couple of reps to Europe to interview scholars who were in displaced persons camps. They wanted to interview them because they wanted to get a bead on their English. Could they speak enough English to actually teach in the United States? And then they produced this book, a list of scholars interviewed. The book indexed the scholars by their specialty, and it listed their credentials so that American universities could sort of match things up and make sure that the credentials would be acceptable to an American school, and that the people would speak enough English to be able to teach here and that sort of thing. And then they could begin the process of recruiting people for for spaces that they had in American institutions, and the scholars in Europe could see if they could find a job here. And this process went between 1945 and 1953. This particular program did terminate in 1953 when they finally closed it down. pretty much filled up all the spots they were going to fill. Okay, so next slide is just a little, oh, this is one of the refugees, one of the scholars that was helped in that program, Mercy Eliade, who was a scholar of religious studies, not of a particular religion, but by what we mean by religion, how people experience religion, how they communicate ideas about religion. So that's him and some of his books. So next slide is the other group they were concerned with was clergy, Catholic clergy in particular. And this was ongoing because after the World War II ended, the Cold War started, and a lot of clergy couldn't go back to where they'd come from because it was behind the Iron Curtain, and basically, Soviet Union and places behind the Iron Curtain weren't using clergy like they used to, so these people needed new jobs. And fortunately, the United States needed Polish-speaking clergy and Hungarian-speaking clergy and Czech-speaking clergy and so forth. So the Catholic Committee for Refugees did the paperwork to get these people permission to leave their diocese, which wasn't always easy because the diocese was in the Soviet sphere, and communicating with them wasn't always easy. And then finding them a bishop here who needed someone with those language skills and was willing to take the person on and put them to work at their new job. So that went on. There's a particular category of these people that I want to mention. So if I can take a look at the next slide. The title here, Exil Familia, actually refers to the Holy Family, which went into exile when King Herod ordered the slaughter of young boys because the wise men had stopped by King Herod to tell him that they were, look at that star up there. Do you know anything about this? The star tells us there's a new king being born and we're looking for him. And King Herod, this is news to King Herod, and he tells the wise men to check with him, tell me when you find this new king so I can worship him. And the wise men realize that's not what he has in mind, so they don't come back to him. And King Herod then orders the slaughter of the innocents to make sure he doesn't have a rival. Anyway, but what this Exil Familia was a document that was produced by Pius XII, and it was produced in the 1950s because one of the side effects of the Soviet Union was that many of the Eastern Rite faiths, many of the Eastern Rite forms of Catholicism, we're used to Latin Rite Catholicism. We're used to people who use Latin. We're used to a celibate clergy. We're used to the rituals of the Latin Rite. But there are other rites. There's a Byzantine Rite where they use another language, where they have a tradition of a married clergy, where they have icons and other kinds of pictures and things like that, other kinds of physical expression, a picture, artwork for their churches and things like that. And Pius XII said, well, now that that's being suppressed in the communist world and these people are migrating to the West, it's up to us to protect that we can't let it die out. We can't have these people just become Latin Rite Catholics. We can't have them assimilate. This is a valuable tradition and we have to keep it. And so the Committee for Catholic Refugees performed a great service by matching those priests up with places where there were laity who also practiced that faith, and they were able to maintain the rituals and maintain the congregations and maintain the whole culture and language and community for a longer period of time. So there's that. Next slide, please. Okay, the last group that the Catholic Committee for Refugees worked with was children. They became pioneers in the world of international adoption. So they were on the front lines of something that became very controversial. When they got involved in international adoption, the practice of adoption in general was transitioning, because it used to be that there wasn't international adoption. Children, if there wasn't enough parents around, you stayed in the orphanage if there wasn't a place where you could be adopted, you just stayed in the orphanage. And the orphanage was usually this great big building where you slept in a dormitory and you ate in a cafeteria, and you just moved around with a group of children that were your age and your sex and doing the kinds of things that you did. So you were kind of in a group. And that was one of the great things about Boys Town in Omaha. It pioneered that kind of cottage system where the kids lived in little families. But the idea that you would be adopted into a family, that everyone should have a family, and that if there wasn't enough families where you were, you should go to another country to get a family. That was a brand new idea after World War II. And so the Committee for Catholic Refugees was part of that idea of moving children from a whole country to another place. And the idea kind of sped up um, in places where the United States had an occupying army, because some of the children weren't war orphans. They weren't people whose parents died in the war. They were children who were the children of American GIs and local women, and the local women just couldn't take care of the children. The GI father got returned home, went on to another mission. It was just a casual liaison, and the mother couldn't take care of the child, so she had to give it up, and there wasn't enough local families, so and it really was a child of two worlds, an American father, a local mother. Why not adopt it into the United States? So the idea of bringing the child here kind of sped up that way. Anyway, the Catholic Committee for Refugees was involved in that world. And it's become, like I say, a kind of controversial world because, they may have overlooked chances to keep the children in the country they came from, keep them with their mothers if they'd been able to provide the mothers enough financial support, enough other kinds of support. We don't know, how other things could have worked. And there are people who work with that. I'll show you a couple of books if you slide to the next slide, please. There's a couple of books on the subject that were done out of our archive, and here they are. Arissa O's To Save the Children of Korea, and more recently, Maria Lorino's The Price of Children, which is about Italy, about adoptive children in Italy. And there's another one on a place called Children's Village in Germany, which really was about children whose parents got lost in the war, not about children who were the offspring of American GIs and local women. So we've got several books written on the children aspect of it, and we've got quite a bit of material on the children. And as you saw, some very cute photos. Okay, next slide. After a generation of this in World War II, after Vatican II, the American bishops reorganized their charitable system, and the Catholic Committee for Refugees was reorganized along with it. The Bishops' Conference, which had been called the National Catholic Welfare Conference, became the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. The conference we call it today, it was briefly called the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, NCCB. Now it's called the USCCB. And the Catholic Conference for Refugees, Catholic, became part of Migration and Refugee Services, which it is today. It's still in Washington. It does mostly at this point policy work and teaching work for the Catholic Church, that is explaining to those of us who attend Mass on Sunday what the teaching of the Church is regarding immigrants and refugees. It doesn't do as much hands-on work anymore, and it's going to be doing even less of it in the near future because President Trump's both reduced the money that they give to the private agencies, that's in the current this year, and also the number of visas for refugees. So both the number of people to be helped and the money to help them isn't there anymore. So they're gonna be forced to do something different by the current administration, and we'll see how that's going to be playing itself out in the next little while. Next picture. So when I was doing this, the two things I wanted to leave with, one was the importance of place. It was really interesting to me that the two places sort of represented those two different approaches, that the Committee for Catholic Refugees from Germany really was like the first attempt to try to figure out what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And that it was such a beginner's operation, such a how do we do this? Where is the money going to come from? Kind of operation. And it is so interesting to look at those records. There is so much I could tell you. And it's so interesting to shift over to the post-war world where it's so much more, it's so big. There's a big government, there's big money, there's a big program, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of people to organize with. I mean, again, there's not half of this that I've gone into because Monsignor Camorra also had to deal with the UN and he had to deal with other agencies. And there's so parts of the story I just cannot tell you because it would just wander us off too far. So that's one thing. The other thing is that so many of our talks are about things that stay in the village. They're about the village and they stay in the village. And this was one that didn't. This was one where every single person just passed through here. They just came here and passed through here, or they were never here. None of those little orphans ever came through the village. Monsignor Camorra well, they did. If they traveled here by airplane, they might have spent the night in the Chelsea Hotel for reasons I cannot figure. But that was how it was arranged. But mostly, this was just the place where the office was. But I think that's something we should maybe think about for future talks is, how many things that the village sort of served as the place where it happened, because, this is where the real estate was good. This is where the location was good. But it wasn't where it wasn't like a neighborhood thing the way it was at the beginning, the way it was in the 1930s. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that idea makes sense because I'd really like to pursue it. Anyway, last slide. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for having me yet again. You are the best audience in the world, which is why I keep asking to come back. And if something occurs to you later, that was my address. Okay.
All right.
Are they all still awake?
Oh, I think they must be. So thank you so much, Mary, for that really fascinating slice of history and obviously incredibly important as well. Now, just some quick questions. Is there any estimate of how many people the committee may have assisted through the period that you covered today?
Before World War II, the numbers are in the scores, probably about a couple of hundred by 1940. And I mean, I'm just counting them, just watching them go by. I've not actually done a count, but I'd say a couple of hundred just from what I did. After World War II, thousands.
Wow,
I mean, there's the clergy alone, you can count in thousands.
amazing. And could you tell us a little bit more of what happened as the US entered the Second World War and Germany declared war on the United States after Pearl Harbor? How did the operations for the committee change? Were they able to still help people, get people out through neutral countries, or were they really, it was a waiting game until the war ended?
They did have people here who they continued to help, by the way. There are people here who they continue to help. Also, and this is a little technical, if you are already here, you can appeal for help. Some of you may know that you can appeal for asylum. You're already here and you appeal for asylum. And that did happen, that people who were already here would say, wait a minute, my visa's expired. I can't go back. What can you help me? Can you do something? And sure, let me see if we can extend your stay. Let me see if we can do something. So they were people here they were helping. Um, they cannot get any more people out because the borders are closed, and there are submarines in the water in the Atlantic that will make the ships go down. So you wouldn't want to travel on the ship; it would sink. Um, so so traveling is out of the question, basically. Um, but there is one other thing. It's not entirely a Greenwich Village story, but I will mention it. There were people that everyone agreed were just sort of in the wrong place. Uh, Missionaries in China, as the Japanese invaded, businessmen who happened to be like visiting Germany, and just, not my fault that you guys declared war on the United States while I was visiting the Bayer Aspirin Company, that sort of thing. And what they did was they got this ship with a neutral flag. It was called the Gripsholm. And they got the ship, it got a neutral flag, and they put those people on it, and it went between the countries and it dropped off the people to their right places. So people who were Japanese in the United States and belonged in Japan, they went back to Japan. And people who were American but stuck behind the lines in China, the Japanese let them out and they got to the United States. Um, some of those people were at Leo House because they were missionaries. They were, there. So that could happen, but that number is counted in the low thousands. It was about 5 trips the Gripsholm made, a couple of hundred people on each trip, about 1,000 people total, and then they're out of people. Then it's like, okay, everyone is in their right place now. No more Gripsholm trips. So does that make sense? Because
Yes, yeah,
when I
no,
tell it to people, it sometimes is like, that's a little weird. but
no,
no,
I mean,
that's the way wars work sometimes. So
yeah, yeah. Now, there's, I think, a lot of really fascinating maritime aspects because even there was the one document that was in your presentation listing all these famous ocean liners from the time too. So that was just fascinating to see. So we have one question here from Patrick. So he says most of the characters in this presentation are clerics. What
yeah.
sort of reach or influence did the Catholic Committee for German Refugees have in the civil or secular realm? So I'm assuming maybe if there were like people, secular folks who worked for the organization. I think there was some exchange between Ostermann and James MacDonald, the American diplomat who fought for safe conduct of German Jews and folks of mixed religion during the 1930s. Can you talk more
Yes.
about that, please?
I can't. I'd love to know more about that myself because it was not run through that committee. That's the one thing I can tell you. It wasn't run through that committee. It was run some other how. So I just don't know about it. I don't have those documents, basically. This whole thing was done out of the archive I take care of. So so if I don't have those documents, it didn't happen. Sorry about that. And I'd love to know more about it because I know this topic is bigger than the documents I have. Yes, certainly there were a great many people who were not clerics. I Again, it was easiest to get out of Germany though if you did follow a profession like teaching or uh, chemist, being a chemist, being a physician, things like that, because the United States visa program had a loophole for people in the professions. Most people who, if you didn't follow one of these professions, you had to get one of the visas that were allotted to people of your nationality. And those were pretty tight. Italy had only 5,000 such visas. Germany had about 40,000, but Germany had millions of people and they're all trying to leave.
Yeah.
So they were just overwhelmed. Austria, which was actually because of the way World War II worked, World War One worked, excuse me, the way World War One worked, Austria had only didn't have so many visas because it got its number after World War One, and they were melded with Germany after the Anschluss, so they got to share Germany's visas after the Anschluss. But before that, they didn't have so many visas, and they were, people who saw the writing on the wall and tried to leave before the Germans got there were, really, really kind of tight. But yeah, people with professions, and we did have, so there were physicians who came over and were placed in hospitals. There were uh, children, not children, but like college students who came over and were placed in colleges on scholarships, because then they could be taken care of. You're paid for. You get to go to your classes and so forth. Um, uh, Teachers, musicians. Musicians was another exception because being a musician is a profession. So people who are going to be placed with an orchestra or who were going to teach at a conservatory
Oh,
could find jobs, things like that. So yeah, I can't give you off the top of my head a particular name, but I do have files with these people's resumes, and they were being circulated in the hopes of finding a place for the people.
right. And if there are no more questions from the audience, this will be our final question for the evening. But can you tell us a little bit more about the collection that your presentation is based on? How did it come into the center's possession, and how much of it have you been able to go through? Is there a lot that still needs to be processed, and is the public able to access it in any way to do any research?
Yeah, going backward, yes, the public can certainly access it. I put my own email on the end because I might not have been thinking clearly. But there's also a CMS email. Just Google the Center for Migration Studies, and you'll be led to our website, and you'll be led to my email. But the collection came to us in 1995. It came to us actually as part of another collection, because this, like I said, the Catholic Committee for Refugees went defunct in 1996, in 1966. And when it went defunct, they just gave the papers to another agency that was operating in New York and was receiving immigrants and was taking care of immigrants. And they just gave the papers to it and said, here, take care of these things for us. And they put the papers in storage. They had this big warehouse, and they just put the papers in the warehouse. And and then that agency, they 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 stopped paying for their warehouse in 1996. They decided they didn't want to keep their warehouse lease anymore. So then they gave us the papers. They decided they were going to give the papers to a proper archive and let scholars use them. So one day, this big truck came and gave us 151 transfiles, which are kind of like banker's boxes full of papers. And they weren't in any order at that point. We had to kind of figure out what the order was. And these papers were embedded in there. We did not know that we were getting this agency, this Catholic Committee for Refugees. We were thought we were getting this other organization's papers, the organization that told us we're getting their papers. They didn't tell us they had two other agencies' papers they picked up along the way. They didn't know that because the papers had been in this warehouse so long. They didn't know what they had. And so we've been kind of picking them apart over the years and figuring out what exactly is in this collection. It's really several different organizations that did several different tasks. They're interconnected, they're all Catholic, they're all immigrant related or refugee related, they're all that sort of thing. But and they're all New York based. They're all New York based, but they we've been trying to figure, and they're all in the same time frame. They all come to an end in the 60s when the church rearranged things after Vatican II. But after that, well, one of them comes to an end much earlier. But trying to sort out what papers are what has been a real real, real challenge for one thing, because they've sort of, they're like in different places, different, literally different boxes, different places. And then the papers themselves represent different things. Like I said, some of them are for clergy, some of them are for scholars, some of them are for kids. And so, what's going on there is different. So that's been an issue. So yeah, it's been really kind of uh, a real bit of a challenge to figure out how this thing works. We've gotten some help because we've had, like I said, some scholars come and use some of these papers for different purposes. And so, although, again, are they using them, or do the papers say what you think they say, is one of the questions. That's one of the things. It's also helpful that occasionally people call us, like I say, they're looking for their own relatives, they're looking for their own background, and it's like, oh, is that what that paper does for a living? So that's what that is for. And so that's very helpful in kind of seeing how these things fit into into us. That's what they used it for. That's how this thing worked. That uh uh here, this is a manifest, this is a manifest, this was on the airplane with the kids as the kids came for their adoption. you know um this piece of paper does this piece of paper does that. And so that kind of stuff is very, it helps us figure out kind of how the collection fits together.
Amazing. Well, thank you for doing all your amazing archival work and then on top of it putting together this amazing presentation for us. So thank you so much, Mary. We really, really appreciate it. And to the folks, our attendees, a very, very big thank you for your joining us this evening and sharing your time with us and joining us on this evening's program. And if you've attended village preservation programs throughout 2025, we really appreciate you joining us for those programs. And if this is your first program with village preservation, we hope to see you at future programs coming up here in 2026. As we mentioned at the beginning, head over to villagepreservation.org, take a look at the work that we do, but also please visit the Center for Migration Studies website. And we'll be sharing all of these links in the follow-up email that will be coming out to you in the next couple of days or so. But Mary, another huge, huge thank you to the rest of you. I wish you Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays. May everyone have a healthy, safe, and very, very happy 2026. And we look forward to seeing you next year for future programs. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful holiday season. Take care and good night, everyone.
Good night, thanks so much.